All right, thank you everybody for joining us. It is indeed Wednesday, September 8th, high noon Eastern Daylight Time, and you are at the Professional Development Consortium of Hampton Roads September workshop on managing the membership offering. For those of you who aren't familiar, wildly familiar with PDCHR, we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, totally dedicated to the education of membership association leaders. Over the course of the year, we provide affordable, which usually means free, and intimate, which usually means a small crowd, education that covers a variety of topics designed to help you lead smarter, not harder. Now, not necessarily everybody in the room today is a member or a leader of a membership association, or necessarily even in a membership association. That's just fine. So whether you're from a nonprofit community or commercial or academic, it doesn't matter. If you walk away with a couple nuggets on how to elevate yourself, your community of interest or practice, or the community that surrounds you, that's perfectly wonderful. And I will declare victory with that. So there will be, at the end of today's session, a little survey link, as well as some information about what's coming up, but we'll save that to later. So let's get right to it. With us today is Mr. Tig Counts. He is the Vice President of Membership for the Hampton Roads Chamber. He and I have talked extensively, and you may have read some of his articles that show up in the Virginian Pilot's Inside Business section. So I'm really thrilled that he's able to be with us today to share his expertise and experience with us. So Tig, with that, sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate your time, appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody, and for those who may get to see the recording afterwards, thank you for checking in. So my goal over the next, say 40 minutes or so is basically just to kind of give a help in structuring the membership offering. And I recognize the fact that either based on those that are on the call or may see the video in the future, that membership can be a very broad-based definition. I've had the opportunity to work for multiple nonprofits and volunteered for multiple nonprofits over my career. And I've worked with some sports recreation groups, industry associations, civic groups, even church groups. So we all tend to sometimes fall within that same definition. So you can't kind of put a square peg in a round hole. So I'll try to keep this as broad as possible, so that regardless what situation you're in, hopefully you can find a nugget that will kind of help with the circumstances that you're in. And because we do have a smaller group, as I work through this, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to virtually raise your hand or put a question in the box, because I can kind of adapt as we go, because really for you all to get the most out of this, I think it will help if we can kind of get an idea of kind of some of the circumstances you may be working through. But I think most of what I'm going to talk about is going to be more at a broad-based standpoint of how to basically plan, deliver, and evaluate when it comes to membership. So first and foremost, planning. Before, whether it's an existing organization, a new organization, first and foremost, I think you really need to start with mission, vision, and goals. If you don't have a mission and you don't have a vision with where you're going with the organization, how do you know if you've gotten there? How do you know if you've accomplished what it is that the whole purpose of setting this organization together to move forward? Not everybody is going to have the time or maybe take the time to put together a specific mission or vision. But I think you still need to have a defined purpose. At the very, very least, just have a defined purpose for the organization. Even if it's as simple as, say, a youth rec league. What is the purpose? What is the mission of that organization? Whether it be to serve the youth, to get more people involved in athletics. In the Chamber's case, our mission is specifically to serve the business community. We are the pro-business voice in the Hampton Roads community. And as our president and CEO likes to say, we do that unapologetically. And I think with most organizations, if you can clearly define that mission and have a vision for where you want to take that organization and then be able to convey that to people, it makes your life a lot easier when it comes to generating new membership, explaining to your existing members what it is you're trying to do, why you have members, why they're paying. In some cases, they're paying to be members. If they're not paying, why are they giving of their time, talent, and efforts to be a part of the organization? So the more clearly that's defined, the easier it's going to be to not only attract but also retain membership. So the other portion of that, when it comes to the planning portion, is data collection. Once you've kind of set in motion what it is you're trying to accomplish, what your mission is, what your vision is, data becomes key at that point. Because if you don't know who it is that you're talking to, whether as prospective members or existing members, it becomes very tough to be able to quantify who you're serving, why you're serving them, and if you're successfully serving them. So just a few things, and some of this is going to seem fairly obvious, but I bring it up in totality because of the fact that I think sometimes we do let things slip through the cracks. And the more thorough you are with your data collection, the more successful you're going to be with your outreach further down the road. So just to key off some specific things, when you're collecting data, when you're collecting, whether it's a prospective member or especially if it's a new member, first and foremost, the date. I know this seems obvious, but many times we don't collect the date in which the member joins. And yet the date that a member joins can be very effective, especially on your retention efforts, whether that's outreach to recognize that the individual is getting ready to approach, say, their first year as a member of an organization. It has to do with financially, whether you're basing your billing cycles off of a fiscal calendar, which in our case, for instance, our renewals are based on the month in which they join. So if we don't know what month they join, it's kind of hard to remember when to renew. If you're on a calendar year, but you're still basing the renewals somehow on the date in which they joined, again, it becomes very important. But that date can be sometimes very easily missed on that. Profile information. One thing I remind people, we sometimes take for granted that the address that people place on the application, and then we forget to ask about billing address, especially if you're working with corporations, but even with individuals. Sometimes individuals would prefer, for privacy purposes, to use PO boxes when it comes to billing for things that would be considered, say, business use or something other than just personal contact. So billing information is important. If you are working with businesses, remembering to ask for business type, knowing not only the businesses that you serve, but the types of businesses you serve, especially if it's industry associations. But even if you're talking about, for instance, a civic league or a church, If you know the type of businesses that you're partnering with, it makes it a lot easier to do follow-up outreach. If, say, you're looking for sponsorships, if you're looking for potential advertisers, if you know the types of businesses that are most likely to sponsor or advertise on for, say, a particular event, or for a particular cause. It's important to know the types of businesses. And sometimes I'll tell you, as large as an organization as we are, you'll get names of businesses that will come through and you assume you know what they do. And many times we're surprised about the fact that it's not always a given that their name directly reflects the type of business or the type of service that they provide. Number of employees, knowing how large a particular company is, social media. If you plan to do follow-up outreach, connecting with businesses via social media, getting their social media addresses can be very important. Social media is such a broad base. It's not that unusual. And I don't know if I'm the only one, but the number of times I've gone in and I've searched for a particular company and thought I found the right company, only to find out afterwards that it's a different company with a different Facebook page. So getting the correct social media accounts is a big one, especially if you're going to use it to help cross promote, because the last thing you want to do is cross promote the wrong company. Any additional contacts? I mean, if you're working with a particular contact, making sure that there are other people within that organization that you should be contacted with. I can tell you, especially on the retention side, if you're trying to retain businesses, other business associations, pretty much anyone that has something other than just a singular household, knowing how to contact other people is key to that retention portion of it. Because if that one person goes away, you're basically starting from scratch. I mean, especially if you're doing it from a kind of a sales standpoint, your sales cycle just started all over again. They might as well be new members. So learning how they heard about you. And this is not a perfect science. I mean, I jokingly bring up that every once in a while, even at the chamber, we'll get someone and we'll ask them how they heard about us, and they tell us, and ironically, it's no, we don't advertise that way. But so it's not always perfect, but it's still good to know. It helps whether you have a marketing team or not, whether even if you're just a singular person, knowing if that came through a referral, or knowing if that came through seeing a sign while they were driving by, whatever that case may be, knowing how they reached you is key, because it also helps you decide where do you want to spend most of your efforts gaining new members in the future. Ranking options, and when I say that, I talk about what's most important to them. Hopefully you've had a conversation prior to a member joining as to why they plan to join. But if not, or even if they have, getting it on paper, getting it into your database so that 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later, you can look back at that and be reminded, why did they join us? What was important at the time? So that, especially from a retention standpoint, have we hit those marks with this particular individual, or have we hit those marks with the organizations as a whole, with our entire membership? Whether they're willing to volunteer. Most of our organizations, if they're membership based, means that we rely very heavily on our members, our partners, to give of their time and talent to help us be successful as organizations. So making that ask up front, that willingness to volunteer, is very key. Don't always assume. And it's also a friendly reminder that if you put it on their initial application that, hey, you will likely get a call from us. So here's fair warning that the phone's going to ring or the email is going to come across, that we are going to make the ask, and that is part of being a member of our organization, whether that's a civic league or a business association or a church organization. Making sure that you remember if you do have multiple levels of membership, that that's documented as well, which then in turn also is a great reminder of including your donation level or investment level based on kind of how you position that ask as an organization. Renewal dates, even if the initial date's on there, put a renewal date on there. Again, as a reminder that whether it's done on a calendar year, so come January 1st, or if not before that, you're going to start getting a call or an email or a letter from us to say, hey, it's time to renew. Or if it's a fiscal year, that if it's in, like in our case, if a member can join any of 12 months during the year, it's a great reminder for both them and us that, hey, come next May, it's going to be time to renew again. And please make sure you mark that down. And payment information. And I'll tell you, it's a big pet peeve of mine, payment information, especially because so many people now are paying via credit card opposed to checks, of getting every last digit correct. There's nothing worse. You've gone through the entire process. You've gotten all the information you need, and you go to run the credit card and you're off a digit. And then there's the uncomfortable call back to the customer to say, somebody got it wrong. And now we've got it, is it the right number? And is it the right expiration date? And so it's that whole idea of write it once, check it twice, if not 3 times. So payment is key for many of our organizations. So it's key to get that up front. To stay kind of on the topic of planning, for many organizations, and I've kind of been surprised over the years, once you've got the data, it's understanding how to use the data, store the data, and CRM systems, database systems are absolutely key. And I don't care how small an organization you are or how large an organization you are. If you do not have a place to store and utilize the data that you have from a membership organization, I honestly don't know how you can be successful. It's in today's day and age, we have so many different forms of communication and so many different formats that to try to do so without a strong CRM system or strong database system, I think is virtually impossible. While I say that, I also acknowledge that for many organizations, the cost to have a database system in some cases is the single largest cost there is, especially if you're basically a volunteer-based organization. So it's not always easy. The one thing I will say, if you're going to spend the money anywhere, spend it on the CRM system. And the reason I say that is because there are many free database systems out there. When I say database, I'm talking about anything that's considered like a true CRM, a customer retention management system, or some of the email systems like a MailChimp or HubSpot. The reason I tell people, if you want to try something for free, that's fine. But if you're going to use it, pay for it. And the reason I say that is because many times systems that start out as free at the beginning, one of 2 things happen. Either for you to better utilize the system, you're going to have to pay to upgrade anyway. Or 2, they end up sunsetting the system because most companies can't afford to keep a free system updated forever. So usually what you'll see is that free system either eventually becomes a pay for system, or they just sunset it altogether. And I can tell you, I've been in a couple situations over my career where they have had to sunset products. And luckily we were given enough time to switch, but in both cases that happened, we didn't actually even stay with the same company. We had to move to a new company. And I can tell you, moving to a new system is sometimes worse than starting with a system to begin with. It's just because nobody does everything the same. So what I typically recommend is that even if it's just a minimal cost, find a system, pay a few extra dollars, get into something that has a fairly good history behind it, has some good reviews on it, pay a little bit more to do at least the initial upgrade, and then use that system. And if a few other things have to kind of wait from a revenue standpoint, then in most cases, I tell people it's worth the sacrifice in the long term for a short term sacrifice. So, but definitely use those. Do your research when it comes to what those systems offer, who they typically best serve. Um, Today, because technology has progressed so much, many database systems are actually built out for specific needs. I mean, when I was vice president of a marketing company, we had a CRM system specifically more for mortgage companies. When I here at the chamber, there are database systems specifically for association memberships like ours. But even if you're just working with, say, for instance, a church group or a civic league, find a system that you feel is best going to serve the needs of that particular. And there are enough reviews out there nowadays. You can go onto YouTube and find 100 reviews, if not more, for literally every system that exists. So I recommend take a few extra minutes, look through those, listen to what people have to say, and then try to find the best one to suit your needs. Once you've got that system, determining your target audience, and I say that both as members and prospective members. Some of them seem pretty obvious, but as an example, like with a civic league, and I mentioned this a little bit before, most people assume, say, for instance, with a civic league, that it's going to be those who live in the neighborhood. Yet ironically, especially if you do offer some sort of civic dues, many times the surrounding businesses are more than welcome to pay the annual dues for a civic membership because they serve the community in which they're based. So if it's a local retailer or restaurant, and they're located right outside of a neighborhood, many times they're more than happy to pay what is for them usually a nominal fee to be a member of the civic league. And a lot of times that's a great source of extra income for that civic association. And it creates a partnership, which from an advocacy standpoint, based on some of the things that may be going on in or around that civic league, it gives them an opportunity to connect with them. It's the same thing with PTAs at schools, the same thing with church groups, same thing with even business associations. I think many people, those who are on the call or may see this video, who've worked with business associations will tell you, if I'm a member of a building association, many times some of our strongest membership are actually the affiliates. It's not the builders, but it's the contractors and the subcontractors that make up a large portion of the membership. So knowing that target audience and including them within that outreach is key. And knowing your members' value. Before they even join, a member is not just the revenue that they generate, especially for organizations who either, say, for instance, don't have dues or have minimal dues, as in some civic associations. Many times the value of the members themselves are the volunteer hours, the leadership that they can provide to your organization, access to additional members and referrals. So many times it's finding those key people that bring value to the organization that's not always a direct revenue. And sometimes it is, sometimes that it's an added bonus. But knowing that value and being strategic about who those individuals are, and knowing your budget. I know this seems obvious, but many times I have partnered or volunteered or been on boards with organizations that the budget itself does not always correlate to either the projected number of members or the revenue being collected from those members. And in a membership organization, especially the smaller the organization, the more the membership should be the driving force behind the revenue for that organization. And the peripheral revenue should almost be a bonus, at least, especially at the beginning. Um, as you've been more established, especially for more established business associations, you can work on that and count on certain revenue. But as many of us found during COVID, there are many of our associations that the only reason we continued to exist was because of that recurring revenue we had from membership. Because the reality was we couldn't do events. So there was no event revenue to be had. And if you can't run the organization based just on that revenue, that's why many of us struggled and in some cases basically had to kind of close the books for a while. So so budget is definitely key on that. So now on the delivery part, because I think this was kind of the key focus for what we were talking about, is basically how do we deliver and some of the key components to doing that. And one of those is the willingness to change and to adapt. Pretty much everybody I would assume on this call is probably already with an organization or has already created the association. So there may already be dues, there may already be membership associated with that. And we've all kind of heard it. Some of us probably read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? It's that willingness to change and to adapt to the membership, to the needs of the membership. And again, I think a lot of us have done so over the last 18 months. If not because we wanted to, but because we had to. And learning how to serve the membership and not just the organization. Because I think sometimes we lose focus on that, is that, well, this was the organization, this is the mission, this is the vision. Does that align with our membership? And do we need to adapt the membership because this is the focus we're trying to do? Or are we trying to be pulled in a different direction? Or do we need to better align the association to fit the needs of the members themselves? So here are some of the questions. What allows you to better serve the membership while providing the members with the most value? So what is the membership based on? And when I say that, I'm talking about how are you, if you are generating revenue based off the membership, how are you determining that? And an antidote I'll give you is one that we at the Chamber have dealt with. We did so several years ago, and it's something that chambers across the country are doing. And I think many of our business associations have been doing so as well. And that is basing our dues, for instance, on the size of the company, whether that's the number of employees or the revenue that they generate. And what we have found, and what many chambers and business associations across the country have found, is that basing the membership investment on the size of a company does not necessarily reflect the needs of the company or what they need to be able to get out of the membership as a whole. And the example I'll give you is that you may have a company that, because of technology, may only need to employ 10 people, but may be working with a $10 million revenue. Whereas you may have a company that employs 100 people, but their annual revenue may only be $2 million. So the needs of those organizations, if we based our membership investment levels and our membership benefits solely on the size or revenue of the organization, does not necessarily reflect what those organizations may need to get out of the membership with us, with their partnership. So one of the things that we had looked to do several years ago, and again, I think this tends to be more of the trend, is to design the membership offerings based more on what the members have told you they need to get out of the membership, and what you are able to provide. And I say that because that's a key point, is don't overpromise and underdeliver. So if the membership is coming back to you and saying, we want X, we want to do more events, we want to do more socials. And even if those events and socials can generate more revenue, um, if that's what the membership wants, then we may need to find a way to accomplish that. And if that needs to be worked in somehow to the membership offerings or the membership investment levels, then so be it. But at the same token, can you accomplish what it is that they're asking you to do? Um, if you can accomplish it, and I'll give some of our chambers, for instance, throughout the state, we have a team of almost 20 people, but I've got friends that work in chambers that it's basically one and a half. It's a full-time executive director and maybe a part-time assistant. Those two people may or may not be able to accomplish a weekly event for an entire year, just solely based on the fact that they need to be able to serve their membership and accomplish those goals. So you also don't want to make that part of the offering. If you can accomplish 52 events a year, then you don't need to be putting that on the membership offering and then having members come back after the fact. That's just one example of many things that you can do. Sometimes, as an example, is the offering of putting key executives in front of people. And chambers, we're all seen as connectors. A lot of our business associations, a lot of our civic associations are seen as connectors in the community. Are you connecting, and are you able to connect the right people within those organizations? If you can do so, great. But if there are going to be limitations to that, make sure that that's clearly either spelled out or at least communicated when you are addressing the membership. Because again, 12 months later, in most cases, you're going to have to go back and ask for that renewal. And if the member doesn't feel like the value was there that you've promised them, it makes it pretty hard to go back and ask for that renewal 12 months later. Along with that, though, can you find unique ways to provide members and get members engaged? So if you are a small team, what are some of the unique ways that you can find to make those offerings and make that value there? An example I'll give you with the chamber, even with the staff we had, we were all working remote for a period of time. So as we see here with these Zoom calls, we found ways to adapt by going online when we couldn't go in person. One of the things that we found as a chamber, for instance, though, coming out of that was prior to COVID, we assumed everybody wanted to get together, like the bigger, the better. If we could put 70 people in a room for an after hours reception at a local brewery, then let's go for it. And people want to be together and they want to have a beer and they want to have a good time after work and they want to network. That's still true. However, what we also found, though, was that when we went into lockdown, we started doing small 10-person networking sessions, similar to like what a BNI would do. And not only were they successful at the time because it gave people a chance to connect when otherwise they couldn't, what we found is when we came out the back end and we got back into in-person events, those small group offerings were still being asked for, but now just in person. Because what we found was that in a traditional sense, you show up at a networking event with 70 people, you grab a beer, and you're still lucky if you have a good conversation over, say, an hour, hour and a half with, say, a half dozen people. Because you just can't get to 70 people in an hour. I mean, it's virtually impossible. Yet you put 10 people in a room for an hour and give them an opportunity to tell their story, to communicate with one another, introduce one another, have 10 minutes apiece to really be able to communicate instead of 60 seconds. And all of a sudden, those created much stronger partnerships. So that's an example where we were able to take some of that change that we were kind of forced into, adapt it, and continue to do those in such a way that we feel now we can all better serve the membership for their needs. So those are just an anecdotal way of explaining how you can kind of adapt as you go. And that's another good example where you don't have to take a lot of time and energy and resource. Um, the the other thing about retention, especially when you talk about change, is reinforcing the intangibles with people. When I talk about the intangibles, I talk about the things that we can't physically put in. One of the issues that we have with a lot of associations, especially if they're business associations, networking associations, um, is the idea that people treat it like a gym membership. Um, so you join the gym, you've planned for it, so you immediately jump in. You've got several months worth of dues that you know you're going to pay for, and you get in there. You're going to the gym once, twice, three times a week, and you're enthusiastic about it. And then 4 months goes by, and things come up, and things become more important, and then you stop using it as much. And then by the month 10, 11, and 12, you're lucky if you're showing up at the gym once a month, much less once a week. And now all of a sudden you're going, well, I don't see the value there. With most of our associations, whether it's a civic league, whether it's a business association, whether it's a church group, the value goes beyond just that physical presence. And it's something you have to continually remind your membership, is that even if that member isn't showing up at the networking events, isn't coming to the educational programs, most of our organizations are still out there working on their behalf. If you're a civic league, there are still leaders in that civic league that are advocating on behalf of that neighborhood, whether it's at city council meetings, at developer meetings in the community to discuss some of the construction that may be going on around that community. Here at the chamber, we're advocating at the city level, at the municipal level, at the state level, sometimes even at the federal level, to advocate on behalf of the business community. Most business associations, the executive directors or someone on staff is doing the same for their particular industry. That work doesn't stop just because we don't show up at a networking event, or we don't show up at a social, or we don't show up at an education session. The work's still being done whether you're there or not. That's the part we have to continually be reminding our membership, is that that work's still being done. And it's a big part of what your investment in our organization is doing for you. So while we need you to be a part of our organization, we want you to be active, we want you to be participating on a regular basis, we also need you to understand that even when you're not around, we're getting work done for you. We're moving, in our case, we're moving business forward. Other business associations, trade associations are moving business forward. Civic leagues are getting things done in the community to ensure that the value of your home or your community is what you expect it to be. That in youth leagues, that the 1 hour we're all spending watching our kid run up and down the basketball court is just a small portion of what those leaders are doing within that organization, and that fee that you're paying goes way beyond just the basketball jersey and the court rental. So those are those intangibles that we have to be reminding our membership of on a consistent basis, which then goes back to that database. It goes back to the outreach. It goes back to consistently giving that message to those individuals, even when they're not physically around us or on meetings or attending Zoom participation. So, and along with that is finding those raving fans. Find those people that they get it, they understand it, they'll advocate for it. They'll be those additional voices out in the community, within their neighborhoods, within the organizations, within your church groups, that are willing to go to those other people, whether they're members or non-members, to tell that story. Because there aren't simply enough hours in the day for those of us that are in our positions to be able to do that all by ourselves. I mean, it's impossible, especially as your membership continues to grow. The more there are to communicate with, the less likely you are to be able to reach every single person by yourself. So you need those raving fans, those people that you can trust to tell the story and tell the story correctly. And to a certain extent, be able to address maybe some of the pushback or the questions that they may receive. And it takes a special person. It's part of the reason why those that you choose, whether they be ambassadors of your organization, leaders, board members, picking those people that truly understand, believe what in your mission, in your vision, in your goals, can convey that to the other people, but can also speak on behalf of it when people do have questions. And knowing that they don't necessarily have to be able to tell the entire story, but being willing to at least say, well, let me put you in touch with Tag, let me put you in touch with Mark. But to be willing to really fend for who you are as an organization and what you're trying to accomplish. And also knowing your value. I mean, I talked about it a little bit before, but I think sometimes, depending on the situation, it can be very easy to not only not know your value, but not to believe in your value. Something we at the chamber, especially when things get tough, many times one of the first things that'll be asked is discounting or what are can we do it for free, that type of thing. And one of the things I tell people is you've got to know your value, and you've got to be willing to stand by that value. If you have determined that the value of a particular membership, whether it's based on your budget, whether it's based on the offerings that you're providing those members, you've got to be willing to stand by that value and understand that we know, we believe, and we're going to stand by the fact that the value of this membership is X. And if you do not believe that that is enough value for your organization or for an individual to join your organization, then that may not be the right fit. But I talk to a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's not just a membership thing. It's a business thing. It's a value thing in general, is being willing to believe in your value and stand by that value. Because the minute you start discounting it, the minute you start doing it for free, the minute you start doing things otherwise, it's hard to go back. It's one thing if you have a free offering and allow people to take advantage of that, and that's wonderful. But when you start to provide a fee, or when you start to have a membership investment level, it's always harder to go back than it is to go forward. So knowing your value and being willing to stick by that, I think is key. The other part of that, from a retention standpoint, is your messaging. We talked a little bit about it with the CRM system, but as somebody who has an extensive marketing background, I will tell you, over communicate. I know people will tell you, I'm tired of getting emails. I'm tired of getting, I feel like I hear from you once a day. I feel like I hear from you every hour. But the reality in today's day and age is there is so much communication. There are so many vehicles with which to connect with people. We are all fighting through the same minutia. So the harsh reality is you've got to be consistent with it. And you've got to sometimes swallow your pride, because I'll tell you, even as a marketing person, there were times where I'm like, do I really want to send this X for the umpteenth time? And inevitably, when I get member feedback, it was the umpteenth time that they received the communication that they finally responded to it. So over communicating is not a bad thing. And being consistent with that message. The one thing I will say is if you're going to send stuff, be consistent about it, be on time with it. If you say you're going to send information out on particular days, send it out on particular days. The worst thing you can do is start to mix up your message, mix up your timing with people. And it just wreaks havoc on people, because we do get into scheduling our own communications within our own sources. I mean, there are certain times of the day that I look at my email. There's certain times of the day that I look at my social media. There's certain times of the day that I have to parse through voicemails. And if I'm expecting certain communication based on the fact that this organization reaches out to me typically on these particular days, then that's usually when I look for it, so that I know I'm not missing something. So consistency is key from that standpoint. Staying on brand is key. If you use particular branding, stick with it. If you're going to make a major change, that's fine. Promote the heck out of it to make sure people know. But if you're using a particular brand, stick with that brand, because part of that familiarity is what makes it easier for people to find you. When I'm looking through 100 different emails and I see a particular brand, whether it's the Chamber brand, whether it's the PDCHR brand, whatever that is, being able to see that easily makes it that much easier for me to pick out that information and to be able to respond to it. But if you're constantly changing up templates, you're constantly changing up the look and feel of your messaging, it just makes it that much harder for me to find it when I'm trying to get to your information out of the minutia of other communication that I'm getting, especially when you're talking emails, but even on social media. Try to keep consistent formatting when able to do so. And I know that can be tough sometimes, because not all of us are graphic designers. Not all of us can afford to have graphic designers. But even if it's in its most simplest form, try to be as consistent as possible. Within that communication, remember, it's not all about you and your organization. People love to see themselves. That's just the reality of it. We don't all have massive egos, but we do like to know about us. If we have member organizations that are part of the chamber, they like to hear about what's going on with themselves, with their other member partners, with others within their industry. So while it's important to make sure you communicate what your offerings are, it's also very important to communicate what's happening with your memberships within that given organization. And it's a tricky balance, because the chamber is a perfect example. We have well over 100 events a year that we do specifically to serve our membership. So we're trying to make sure our members know what it is we're doing for them and with them, while at the same token, we want to make sure that we talk about our membership, what's happening with them, what are they accomplishing, some of the success stories within the community. So knowing how to balance that, and just remembering that it's not always about us, it's about them as well. Might provide actionable insights and perspectives that help your members thrive and add value to the work and organizations. And basically, that's the educational part of it. Be a resource. Not only in many cases are you advocates for your members, but you're an educational resource. You're seen as an expert in a particular field. So give that information. Mark talked about some of the editorials that I've done with Inside Business. And if you read through those editorials, while I reference the chamber, it's not really about the chamber. It's about different aspects of what I see as what's important in the community. Some of the editorials I've done have to do with volunteerism, networking, getting back to business. Again, while I may have referenced the chamber, it really wasn't about the chamber. It was about what can help us move forward within the business community, what can move forward within volunteerism within the Hampton Roads community. So be a resource, both within your organization and outside your organization, because again, your members do see that. And while sometimes it's in a peripheral sense, they see you as an expert, and they see that as being part of the value of why they belong to your organization, why they partner with you. So give back from that standpoint. understanding your perceived value versus your actual value. And when I say that, I say that because perception is reality. We as executives, we as people who are either the chairs or the founders or the organizers within our different organizations believe many times down to our bones that what we do has great value for our community, for our membership, for the Commonwealth. We believe it, we live it, we breathe it. But the harsh reality is if our members don't perceive that, that's the reality. So many times you kind of have to, it's almost like you have to come out of your own skin. Get into the skin of your membership, whether that's talking to your membership, whether it's doing surveys and really taking the feedback you get from those surveys and being willing to honestly parse through it. But understanding what is the perceived value of organization and being willing to take that feedback, which in many cases can be tough. Sometimes it can be an ego killer. Because we are so proud in what we do, and getting harsh feedback is not easy. But if you're not willing to address those perceptions and adjust for them, or at least just address them with those who have those perceptions, it makes it very, very difficult to grow a membership. It makes it difficult to retain members. So having a clear understanding of what that perception is, and then relating that perception to the overall investment. If the perception is X, if that's the reality of the large majority of your membership, then again, that goes back to the value proposition. Do they see enough value based on their perception of the organization to provide retention? So understanding that and reinforcing those intangibles so that perception is closer to what your reality is key to that. And part of that goes into the evaluating, which is the last part of that. Like I said, I measure everything. Sometimes I measure things I don't need to be measuring, but the reality is, the more you measure, the more you have a clear understanding. And I don't care how small the organization is, whether it's revenue driven or not, whether it's just simply measuring how many members you have, how many members you plan to have, and how many members you ultimately have at the end of the year. Just having those numbers and having a clear understanding of what that is, because that's such a big part of your plan. And if you're not executing that plan, if you're not measuring that, then how do you know you've actually accomplished what that mission was that you set to begin with? And that goes back to the surveys. I believe Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mark sends out surveys after most of these meetings. Is that correct?
Yep, that's true. We'll have one actually in this meeting, an opportunity to do there. And we follow that up with our thank you note that will come out in 2 days. There's another chance if you didn't fill out the survey today. And then the biggest follow-up, biggest potential value follow-up is one that comes out 2 months later saying, hey, from what you learned, have you been able to apply any of this? And it's essentially the same questions. So yeah, I think that's like so many other points you've made so far, Dave. That's a real critical thing to get some degree of insight on, are you providing value?
Absolutely. And what I love about the way Mark does it is the fact that it's done immediately. It's not only just long-term, but it's done immediately, because I can tell you the hardest thing to get feedback on is something that's done 6 months, 12 months after the fact, or even as chambers, when we reach out maybe once a year. I can tell you, and I have this discussion regionally with a lot of leadership. And for whatever reason, and I don't know if it's just Hampton Roads by nature, or if it's just because we all live here, so we all kind of use each other's anecdotes, but survey responses are just really tough. To get really legitimately good response rates can be very, very difficult. But I do believe the sooner you make the ask, the easier it is to get the responses. Whereas if you give time for people to walk away, it just makes it that much harder to get them back in front of you, and then in turn get them to be willing to answer those questions. But it is a key measurement to know, are you, again, it goes back to the perception, is what I think I've accomplished through having this webinar, if what I think I've accomplished by having this event or this networking gathering is what I think I was going to accomplish actually accomplished in doing so. And the only way to know that with 100% certainty is if you're actually getting the responses from the people who participated. So that's why I say getting that initial feedback is so key to it. And it is getting to be so much easier than it used to be to do that. I mean, it's the days of us having to pick up the phone and call 50 people after a networking event. When you can send an email, when you can send something as simple as just a QR code that they can link on their mobile phone and then do a quick response on there. Going back on some of our social media platforms, LinkedIn now offers polling questions on LinkedIn that are connected. So you can literally connect directly to the people you're asking. So there's multiple ways that you can do that. But that is such a huge key. Understanding your ROI. Again, I know this seems obvious, but surprisingly, many organizations don't have an annual budget, or they don't really have a clear understanding of what that annual budget is, or the value of the individual membership. And I say that from the standpoint that the value or the investment made from a membership is not just simply based on the benefits that you're giving. It also needs to be based on whatever the budget is that you're trying to accomplish. As an example, and I'm just going to throw out just relative numbers, but if you're an organization that has $2.5 million budget, in order to pay payroll, keep the lights on, do the outreach, do all the things that you need to do and are expected to do by your membership, if it's going to take $2.5 million to accomplish that, and you can do so with 2,500 memberships, then you know each of those memberships value has to be X in order to accomplish that budget. But keep in mind that if you have a retention rate that's only going to be 80%, the reality is along the way, you're either going to have to charge more per membership to make up for that 20% that you no longer have, or you're going to have to go out and replace those 20% of the membership. And when with a recurring membership model, that sometimes can be the hardest thing for many individuals to understand. And then in many cases, like the chamber, for instance, we have recurring membership from a fiscal standpoint. So for instance, my members, I may only have X number of members that are renewing in February compared to March, April, or May. So the revenue that's coming in isn't always equal all 12 months out of the year. So when you're going to pay your bills, the likelihood is your rent's probably going to be the same all 12 months. And your landlord doesn't care that only 5% of your membership is being retained in February, but 15% of them get retained in January. The bill's still going to be the bill. So when it comes to those types of fiscal responsibilities, that is as important a part of your retention as anything else, because you've got to understand that the money that you're bringing in from a retention standpoint as a recurring cost throughout all 12 months out of the year, not just for that one particular month. And that's something that can be very, very difficult, for instance, with boards. That's one of the reasons I talked about the importance of having people on your board who have a clear understanding of that. I mean, if you have a P&L sheet, if you've got to run a P&L sheet in order to accomplish your mission as an organization, you need to have board members that also understand how to read that P&L sheet as well. So that when they look at that recurring membership, they have a clear understanding that yes, 15% of our dues come in January, but we can't go spend it all in January, because come March and April, I'm only getting 5% of that retention. So I got to pull some of January's revenue to be able to pay those bills in March and April. So, and it has less to do with the retention, but it's a key component of understanding how those retention numbers have to be addressed throughout an entire fiscal year. So, and then also understanding how much time are you spending attracting and retaining those members. That is as much a part of the value proposition as anything else. Because again, especially for small organizations that have only maybe 1 or 2 people, there's only so many hours in the day. And how do you allocate the time that's spent to the retention versus attracting new members? Because if you've already got the members, can you spend less time retaining the existing member and then not having to go out and replace them after the fact? Or is it a situation because of growth that you can expend the extra time to go attract new membership and therefore grow that budget and grow that additional revenue? But if you don't know what those numbers are, if you don't have a clear understanding of what is my retention rate, how many members am I keeping throughout the year, and how much of that revenue is being retained, that's a key component to understanding, okay, how much time then should I be devoting to that opposed to going out and getting new members? And again, it goes back to your volunteers, it goes back to your board, it goes back to additional staff, depending on what your structure of an organization is understanding where do we allocate those resources. If you're a one-person show and you can't spend all of your time going out and attracting new members and still be able to retain the members you have, then you're going to have to lean on that board. You're going to have to go to the board and say, for us to grow as an organization, you've got to bring me new members, pure and simple. And if you're not willing to do that, either we have to readjust our plans for the year, or I've got to find other ways to go do that. And that's either additional person, or we got to get the right people in-house to get it accomplished. And those can be very uncomfortable conversations with board members or staff. But it's the reality for most of these organizations, especially if it's membership based and revenue based, is the fact that, I mean, it's got to be run like a business. I mean, we are nonprofits. We may be 501c3s, or in our case, a 501c6. But the reality is, I've got payroll to make. I've got costs to incur, and if we can't meet those, we're going into the red, and it's got to come from somewhere. So, especially as a nonprofit, because as most of you know, as a nonprofit, we're a zero balance organization at the end of the year. So it's not, in many cases, it's not like you make up one end and you can make up for the difference on the other. I mean, technically at the end of the year, we're all supposed to be zero balance. So it's just such a key component of that. And making sure that you're focused on those key components. I mean, like I said, it goes back to those raving fans. Find the people that are going to help you accomplish that, and make them such a big part of that organization. One of the things, and I don't say this in a derogatory way, because we as a Hampton Roads Chamber and a regional chamber are incredibly proud of the fact that anywhere from 85 to 90% of our membership are small business partners. In many cases, these are people that are doing everything they can on a day-to-day basis to open the doors in the morning and close the doors at night. They're just trying to make payroll. They're trying to do everything they can to finish that year in the black, to accomplish their goals. And the Hampton Roads Chamber, quite honestly, is kind of secondary to them. But in many of those same cases, they're also the ones that need the most help. And I openly talk about this. There are going to be those investors, those big investors within certain organizations, whether you're a business association that has affiliate members or key sponsors that are willing to stroke a very nice check to help your organization, and they're just happy with what you do. And you may get that check once a year, and you may never hear from them again. They're the easiest members in the entire world, and we all love to have them. but for every one of those, there's 10 other people that they pay the minimum investment possible. And they are in your email and on your phone and in your text all week, every week, all year long. They're taking up the most of your time with the least amount of investment. And I don't fault them for it. In many cases, it's because they are that small business. They are those people that need the most help. But as an organization, you've got to be able to balance that. You've got to be willing to understand, I have X amount of hours in the day, either as an individual, as a team, or even with my volunteers. There's only so much time in a day, a week, a month, or a year to be able to give back to our membership. And I've got to be able to know, how can I best serve the membership as a whole, and not just individually. And again, those can be some very, very tough decisions. And in our case as a chamber, it's that balancing act of understanding that we want to be able to serve the small business community, while also understanding that our biggest investors are the ones that, in many cases, the top 15% of the investors that we have are also the ones that probably pay 50% of the bills. So how do you balance that, is such a big part of your retention. And there's no magic button. There's no secret that I'm not giving you on this presentation that's going to solve all that issue. It's unique for every organization. But sometimes it does mean that you have to make some hard decisions as an association, as a nonprofit, and make the decision, okay, is this best for our organization to continue to serve our community or our other organizations if it's a business association. And I've seen chambers have to make some of those hard decisions. I've seen chambers that have pivoted and decided we're only going to focus on small businesses. We're going to drop the investment levels and we're going to just focus on the small business community because that's who needs the most of our help. But I've also seen chambers and business associations that said, as an advocate, we can do a lot more by just simply partnering with our biggest investors, cut back as much as possible, and spend all of that revenue and all of that time advocating, because the reality is when they advocate, they're still going to end up advocating for the business community as a whole. But that's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing for an association to turn around and say, we're going to keep advocating for you, but we're not going to focus on your memberships anymore. So it's not always a comfortable conversation, but is it the best conversation based on the viability of what can be accomplished by those individuals, by those professionals, by that organization? And is there an opportunity maybe for others to fill that need? If I'm a regional chamber and they're only going to focus on certain people, can a smaller chamber come in and fill that void that maybe we've left? So it's a tough conversation to have, but again, I think it all goes back to that mission, vision, values. I mean, are you serving the mission that you set for yourself at the beginning of the year? Are you accomplishing the goals that you've set for yourself? And are you being held accountable for that? And quite honestly, the best form of accountability is how good is your retention of membership? I mean, do the members see that value? Is the perception there? So that's me rambling on for probably a better part of an hour. I believe we've got some time set aside for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss them and do what I can to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take big round of applause from me, and I'm just going to assume that those who don't have the screens on are applauding wildly. Sally's smiling, and that's perfect. So thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. So Sally, Ariel, and whoever our mystery participant is with phone number ending in 4132, please feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself if you got a question or an observation you'd like to throw out there. In the meantime, while you're formulating, and of course, nobody ever wants to go first, a couple of points I'd like to, share or maybe see if there's a little expansion on. So Ted went back a couple times. You mentioned about the raving fans, folks who will advocate on behalf of your organization. Might be your board, might be just people who attend programs, might be people who have otherwise benefited from being a member rather of your organization. So a question, maybe for Tag and anybody else who wants to jump in. Do you use your CRM, your customer relationship management system, to identify those raving fans? If so, how does that work? And if not, how would you do that?
I just wanted to make sure nobody else was answering. We do it in multiple ways. We do use the CRM system from the standpoint that, for one thing, many of your, whether it's a CRM system, whether it's an email system, you can see a lot of measuring. When we talk about going back and doing measuring, one of those measuring is understanding the analytics of, say, for instance, email responses. If you do a large group email, you can typically see the total number of people who have opened it up, people who have clicked through. What can be difficult about that sometimes is the fact that you don't necessarily know specifically who it is that clicked through in a large group setting, which is why sometimes, based on some of the smaller group events, if you have the time, and sometimes it can be a little bit more time consuming, but a perfect example is, say, for instance, you do a small 10-person networking session, and you do have a CRM system or even something as simple as like MailChimp. Rather than sending that out as a group, try sending them out as individual emails. And the reason I say that is because then when you're sending it to just one person, when you go back to look at the analytics, if that email is opened, if that email is read, if that email has had a click through to whatever link you've provided, you know that that person, that specific person, has actually opened the email and read it. And I can tell you with some of the, for instance, our small group sessions, it's nice to be able to go back and see, okay, if Mary consistently opened these emails over, say, the past 12 months, and also, by the way, has consistently been the one showing up to these small group sessions, that potentially is a raving fan. So, and like in our case, we then turn around and use a lot of our raving fans for what we call ambassadors. And our ambassadors, while they aren't necessarily on a board, they are the people that we use to, for instance, at the chamber, we have some fairly large in-person events. So if you can imagine trying to get 1,000 people seated for a luncheon, when all 1,000 of them are all trying to network with one another in the lobby at the exact same time. Meanwhile, our poor keynote speaker's trying to start his meeting. Our ambassadors are the ones that will step up and help keep people seated, let people know, hey, we're getting ready to start the program. They also help us, like, for instance, when we go to ribbon cuttings, they come and are just additional attendees at the event to help us kind of bulk up the numbers for those types of things. They do outreach for our existing members. Even for one, and that's one thing I will bring up that I didn't mention. If you do have these raving fans and you do find them, even in a 100% volunteer environment, they are many times the best people to ask to then do retention calls, event calls, direct outreach type of communication. Because they love to tell the story. They are raving fans. In many cases, like in our situation, they're usually salespeople or development directors within their organizations. So they spend all day talking to people anyway, and they're more than happy to do so. But to go back to your point, you can definitely use the CRM systems and the data you get from those to find those people. But it does sometimes take a little bit of extra work based on how you're sending that communication out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that take. Sally, Ariel, on the phone, anybody?
Well, I sure appreciate everything you said, occasion. We're a very small organization. We do use data a lot. We're the American Association of University Women, and the national level you can be a member just of national, or you can be a member of a local branch, and so we're always trying to get the national members who live in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, which doesn't have a branch yet, to come to our meetings. So it's kind of a small reflection of what you're talking about using data. And we keep quite a few things in our roster, but we don't have the ability to look at who opened emails. And we can always do who responds to emails, of course, but I really appreciate a lot of the things that you said, and we have reflections of that and how we run things, and I'll pass things along too from my notes, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I will remind people, and I think we tend to forget this, and we even do this at the chamber sometimes, especially when you were talking, for instance, small groups, where you say, for instance, most of your outreach is via like Outlook or a Gmail account. So as you said, maybe you're not using a CRM system or a MailChimp, so you don't have a way of tracking how many people opened it. One of the things I recommend when doing that is specifically make the ask in the email, because sometimes we forget to do that. So for instance, if you send out an email about a particular topic, even if it's not an ask to be in attendance, say it's just, we're planning on doing X and you're sending it out, don't be bashful at the end of the email or even right at the beginning of the email to just say, please respond if you have any interest, or please respond if this topic makes sense for an upcoming meeting. Basically make an ask of some sort of response. You're still not going to get everybody, but you'll be surprised to find how many actually do take the extra minute to respond to it. Because I think part of it is, and most of us are old enough to remember when email first came around, like everyone responded to everything because we all treated it like a traditional conversation. So if I sent an email that said nothing more than, hi, Joe was going to respond back, hi, Tag, because that was just etiquette. I'm like, you just respond.
That doesn't happen nowadays.
Nowadays, people don't do that. They get their email, they don't respond because it's just one of a trillion emails in there. So one way you can kind of help facilitate more of that feedback is make an actual ask in the emails. And it doesn't matter how or what. And you don't even have to do it every single time. But if you do feel like the email is important enough to get some sort of feedback or some idea of who's actually taking the time to read this and respond to it, make some ask somewhere in that. I mean, and you can even highlight it in red or something. But we've even started to do that with some like our division boards. And again, a lot of it goes back to COVID because of the fact that it wasn't like we were going to then turn around and be able to physically see them at a later date and also have that conversation. So the problem is if they didn't respond, or if we didn't know that they were getting the information, it's not like they didn't show up at another event. It was days, weeks, months later before we realized either they never read it or they claimed they never got it. Yes. So that is one thing I tell people to if you don't have the system set in place, kind of build it into your general communication. And it's not perfect, but it's definitely a little bit better than nothing.
Yeah, so. It's a good idea. I do it occasionally, but not all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, so PDCHR, we are not a membership organization, but we try and operate like one, which makes a lot of sense considering who we're trying to support. So, there's a lot of stuff that Tag was, mentioned today that I was either patting myself on the back for saying, yeah, we do that, or writing down, in my copious notes, it's like, yeah, we really should do that. A couple concepts that I think are really important to underscore. So there was the over communicate. So typically for an event, I'll send out a notification 3 Mondays before this event, and it goes out Monday morning at 6:15 a.m. regularly. And then MailChimp reminds me on Tuesday, it says, hey, you want me to send this again to all the people who didn't open it up? And the same thing happens 2 days before, et cetera, et cetera. So, so my CRM, MailChimp, and I'm still able to use it for free, take, but hopefully next year I'll have to pay. That will be actually a sign of success. It is my friend for that. And plus I've got, because I'm the sole staff, I have some reasonably elaborate automation that I've developed along the way behind the scenes to help create this stuff. But yeah, so there's just tons of communications. And every now and then I have that twinge of, oh, maybe people are getting sick of it. Then I look at, how many people unsubscribe, and it's like, maybe 1 or 2 per blast. So out of 1,500 people, that's not so bad. That's just going to happen, people moving on. So yeah, absolutely would be over communicate. And also the brand consistency, is key. I don't know if as a matter of fact, I'm 100% certain that PDCHR's own branding is not quite right, but by God, it's consistent. Everywhere you turn, you're going to see this, this emblem, associated with this. To be perfectly honest, our name is completely wrong for what we do, but when over the next year we'll be actually looking at that, and then there'll be a whole new branding package with all the appropriate stuff. But it's never made up. It's like it's built once, and always go back to that and draw from that. One quick cleanup here. I'm gonna bring us to a little bit of a wrap up here, unless someone, I'll give you a 5 count, so if you want to jump in. 5, 4, 3. Okay, so we're gonna just about wrap this up now. So in the chat box, as I thank you, I've placed a survey, and sometimes it's a clickable link, sometimes it isn't. So at the very top of what I just put in there, at survey.pdchr.org, if you just copy and paste that into your browser now, you don't have to fill it out. It'll take you less than a minute, just 3 questions that you got to answer, and 1 just about future stuff. Coming up next in just about a month, on Wednesday, the October 13th, we'll be shifting back to the evening for the last quarter. We're running a roundtable. I'll be hosting that. And so for those of you who just want to chat about association operations, kind of a birds of a feather discussion, go ahead, there's a link right there. And of course, you're going to get an email, as I promised, on Friday, automatically, with a, thanks for attending, here's what's coming up next, as well as a link to the resources page, including our YouTube channel, where you'll be able to see our recording today and refresh that. Speaking of our YouTube channel, in February of this year, rather, we did have a really interesting presentation on gathering and analyzing membership feedback. As a matter of fact, let me just type our channel in there. I don't have the that specific one memorized, but you can just copy and paste youtube.pdchr.org in there. So back in February, we had a session on measuring and analyzing membership feedback. And one of the key, tons of goodness in there, but one of the key takeaways, I think, maybe just to add on what Tate was saying about making that ask up front, is also consider telling them why you're making the ask. If it is to fill out a survey, it's like, this will help us deliver more value to you in the future. If it's, please contact more, just please contact us, because email isn't necessarily the most effective or efficient way of communicating, and we would love to hear with you. Just old-fashioned, pick up a phone, I promise I'll answer, or something like that. So give a little reason for it, that so it's not coming out maybe just as a sales pitch, or what's in it for me, but not what's in it for you type thing. So with that, I want to thank Ariel, I want to thank Sally, and I want to thank 757-739-4132 for hanging out. For the person on the phone, I've sent you, a couple of texts to try and gather your information, as well as what I just put in the chat box. So with that, anything else? It looks like we all get 5 minutes gift of time, unless somebody wants to take that back right now. Sally, I see you talking. I know you're muted, but I'm sure you were saying something about love.
I just said thanks.
All right,
Lots of
Sally.
good ideas.
All right. Well, thanks again, Tate. Thanks again for everybody for being with us. I'll hang out here for a couple minutes. You're welcome to bail out as you wish. But if you have any particular questions or thoughts for me or for about PDCHR, I'll be here for a little bit. And then, but lunch sounds pretty good, so it smells pretty good, so probably only for 4 more minutes. So with that, good luck, God bless, and go forward.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Tate. Hey, 757-739-4132. All right. Well, thanks everybody. For all of you who listened, you didn't miss anything in the last couple seconds there, other than a couple of thank yous and I love yous. So that's perfect. Please keep an eye out for us. Check out events.pdchr.org to see what's coming up. Right now, we've got everything listed through the end of the 2021, but within a few weeks of this, so by the end of September, you'll see our full list for 2022. Hope to see you at one of our events soon. Take care.